New technology is often the spark that leads to transformative change. That's a no-duh statement if I've ever heard one, but lately I've been thinking about how technology influences information. Take the printing press, which made information more accessible and kickstarted social, religious, and political revolutions. The internet reshaped how we socialize and communicate and ended up upending the global economy. And now, generative artificial intelligence promises to increase our productivity, enhance our creativity, and maybe even fundamentally change how we work. But in the context of information, what's it do? It generates answers to our questions, instantly, confidently, but not always accurately. So, is AI making it easier to understand our world? Or is it just adding more noise to an already noisy environment? Today we're exploring that question. We're talking about trust, truth, and the blurry space in between. Welcome to Lab Coat Optional from Arizona State University, the show where advanced research meets everyday curiosity. I'm your host, Pete Zrioka, and each week we talk with the researchers behind this work, minus the jargon, and definitely minus the lab coat. Today we're joined by Joshua Garland, the director of the Center on Information and Narrative Complexity in the Global Security Initiative at ASU. He spent over a decade working with large language models, and most recently, he's been researching how to detect AI content and understanding who might be behind it. Together, we dig into the challenges of detecting AI-generated content, why it's so hard to figure out the motives behind it, whether regulation can keep up, and how it can rescue public discourse from all the noise. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start off by talking about where we find ourselves now. We're in an era of information abundance, and I would say it's probably fair to say we've never found ourselves in such a deluge of information as we do now. And I think we're maybe just now beginning to grapple with how that's affecting our minds and society. So in terms of AI and generative AI in general, how do you think that contributes to this information abundance landscape we find ourselves in?
Well, I think it's like a really interesting relationship because I don't know that it's the one that everybody's scared of, where you have sort of this generative AI, like creating images and videos and manipulating the public. I think it's really sort of this trust for it that's the problem, right? So I think that images and videos have kind of not had a lot of importance. If you look at the last election cycle, for example, everybody said it was going to be the election of AI and the election of, false information generated by AI manipulating people. And it's sort of, a lot of people that I've talked to said that AI basically had no impact. And so you had obviously some images of different politicians being generated and passed around, but it was very obvious that it was AI.
Right.
And, I think one of the ways that I've seen it sort of creep in at this point is that people sort of have this, this idea that whatever the AI says is mostly right. And so they'll ask it questions as if they're asking an expert the question, and then just taking that answer as if it's true, or generate the citations for X and just taking that what it is. And like, I think what everybody, at least that deals with AI, knows is that, whether you want to call it hallucination or something else, they just make up things that they don't know. And even things that seem like should be very basic tasks, they just really fall off the radar really, really quickly. And so I think that's kind of how it's going to affect the environment, is this like sort of blind trust. Or, well, it's really good. This is the best new model. It's going to give me the correct information, right, even if it's just a little bit wrong.
Do you think there's anything analogous to how dependent and trusting people are becoming on this particular technology to anything we've seen in the past?
Well, I mean, you could argue that in a lot of ways. So there's been, you sort of think when you have a democracy, you have these kind of trusted pillars of democracy, and you have journalists and scientists and domain experts, and people have looked to those people even when they've been wrong, right? Like journalists make mistakes, scientists make mistakes, like every profession makes mistakes. And even if you're the expert, you can misspoke or misspeak, things like that. And so, I think blind trust in any of these fields has been rampant in the past, or, looking at, whatever prophet lives in your city or oracle that lives in your city and having blind trust for them, even when they're going to make mistakes. And I think it's been something that's been a part of our history for a long time.
Blind trust in an institution or a system. But now that system is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and I think that I want to be clear too that you should trust experts.
Yeah,
there should be journalism that you can trust. You should be able to trust science and the scientific process. It's just the fact that people make mistakes.
Yeah.
On every level.
And there's new discoveries that change old discoveries, and papers issue corrections for a reason,
100%. And I think that's something that's not really spoken about, is that information is not static, right? Information evolves from day to day as new things come about, as there's new scientific discovery, as there's new evidence that really kind of pushes the boundary, especially if you're looking at something kind of right on the edge of scientific knowledge or something that's brand new, right? Like if you look at a new vaccine that just came out, there's not really any knowledge of it.
Yeah.
The scientists know that it works. There's clinical studies that work, and the experts have an idea of it, but the general public doesn't. And so it's really easy in those situations for bad information to kind of get pushed around and digested.
So when we're talking about generative AI right now, we're talking about LLMs, largely ChatGPT, Claude, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was kind of curious about your experience with AI. Do you use it regularly? How do you use it? How often?
Yeah, so I'd say that my experience with AI is, as a producer and as a consumer, I've worked in the AI space now for 10 plus years, 15 years maybe.
So a lot longer than I think the general public.
Maybe, yeah. Back when language models kind of weren't cool, they didn't really do anything good. You had to train them, and they were kind of okay.
Yeah.
And in this new generative space, we've been working a lot in our center on many different aspects of large language models in particular, not so much some of the other generative AI technologies, primarily because our expertise is in natural language processing, which is sort of the field of study underlying things like LLMs.
Sure. But how often, so you've been using it for 10 years. Do you use the consumer products like Gemini or ChatGPT?
Sorry, forgot about that.
No, it's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, and I absolutely also use a lot of the generative AI stuff every day. And so, one of the ways that I find it to be really helpful is that I'm a really bad writer. I'm good at math. I'm good at computer science. I'm really bad at writing. And nobody told me when I was a little, when I was in college and they said, I want to be a mathematician, that they're like, great, that means you're going to be a writer the rest of your life. That's not what I signed up for.
I'm number smart, not word smart.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll kind of use it as a copy editor. And I'll say, it's not writing for me.
Yeah.
I write the paragraph I want to say, and then I say, hey, can you offer suggestions? Can you offer criticisms, refinement? And I go back and forth with it as if it's a copy editor, which is a lot different than write me a paragraph or generate knowledge. It's saying that, it's offloading it.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, told me a while ago, probably 10 years ago, that artificial intelligence was a really bad term. And AI should be assistive intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And it should be something that supplements what you're good at, right? Like, I'm not good at writing, but I'm good at computer science. And so let me use that as like a supplementation so I can be better at what I'm good at.
Yeah. I'm a writer by training, right? So like LLMs as an abstract thought scare the hell out of me, because it's like, okay, they're just going to replace what I do. So that's why I got into podcasting, because, it's just another skill set that AI can replace. But anyway, we talked about how generative AI is kind of changing the way people like are perceiving information, right? Do you see AI as helping people make sense of the world, or do you think it is kind of adding more noise to an already noisy environment?
Yeah.
Both.
I want to say both.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a lot of ways that generative AI is helping people understand knowledge, like, understanding criticism, right? So as an academic, you often get back peer-reviewed articles, right?
Sure.
And so they say, like, here's all things I had wrong with your paper. And because it's a human on the other side, a lot of times I have no idea what they're talking about.
Okay.
Right? Like criticism point 3, no idea what they mean. So I'll take the paper, I'll put that criticism into something like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, and say, like, help me diagnose what the criticism is here. Right. Help me think through this process. What is they asking? What's the criticism? Is it valid? Is it not? And just sort of think through it. And then way I can go in and do some work on it. And I think people use it all the time for that. Like, how do I make sense of these two ideas? How do I bring these two things together? You hear people saying, what should we know about the intersection between, neurology and immunology? Right? Like, what are the big ideas in that field? And obviously that's something you need to check.
Sure.
It's not a profit, but it helps you kind of bring together these ideas. But it's also adding to the noise in the environment. Like people thinking that everything that comes out is pretty much true. Well, yeah, it's a huge AI. What are you worried about? It's writing code for me. Clearly the code that it writes for me is correct. It's the right formulas, which is just adding bad noise, right? I mean, I was writing some code the other day that wasn't particularly hard, and I was using it for some of the subroutine stuff that is kind of, just you got to get it done, but it's not interesting, it's not exciting.
Yeah.
And what I was surprised is it took like 10 to 15 times of prompting it and saying, like, that's not right, that's the wrong formula, that's the wrong variance, that's whatever it is. And so I think it adds a lot of noise to this environment for sure.
You work in narrative complexity.
Yeah.
Right? I guess what role do you think AI is playing in the narrative complexity we're seeing in the world?
So I think in a lot of like kind of subtle ways, right? Because, the things that come out of these AI models are whatever you put into those models, and whatever you put into those models then shapes the answers.
Sure.
And, depending on how reliant you are on these chatbots, if you're using it to kind of understand the world around you, that's going to bend your narrative towards the training model, right? And so you have sort of a lot of the data that goes in is sort of this, Western white kind of ideology. And if that goes in and then people are just consuming that, it sort of bends you towards that. And so I think that's one way. I think that there's this idea that information is sticky, and the more you see something, the more you think it's true, even if you're told that it's false.
Okay.
And so if you just see things over and over, regardless of their truth value, it then kind of gets buried inside of your mind as this just sticky fact, whether it's true or false.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that if LLMs are kind of regurgitating the same kind of things over and over, or if you have a particular like cognitive bias towards X, then it says something. It's like, well, this AI said it. So then it can kind of enforce that and then increase that narrative bias and that narrative complexity.
Interesting.
And so I think that aspect are kind of two things that I think could happen. But I'm not sure if it's happening yet. I think that, generative AI feels to me like this really, really powerful tool and also potentially powerful weapon. But I don't know that it's been fully weaponized yet.
You don't think it has?
I don't know. I don't think it has.
Okay.
And I mean, there's sort of direct ways where it has in terms of like foreign adversary propaganda.
Yeah.
And so there's some really interesting work that came out trying to say is like regular foreign adversary propaganda, or is foreign adversary propaganda generated by ChatGPT more effective? And what they found is that by like pretty big margins, the AI generated propaganda was a lot more effective. And people think, like, hypothesize about this because it's really hard when you're studying humans to come up with anything causal, that it's because it's a lot more fluent. So like it kind of seems like someone could have written it versus a lot of the foreign adversary propaganda is written by people that maybe don't have a good, English language set.
Sure.
So it comes across as broken, or it comes across like the grammar's weird. And if you can clean that up and then maybe put some cultural spin on it, right? Like write this. This is what I want to say, but then write it in a way that would be receptive to someone in Alabama or Ohio.
Becomes a lot more convincing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you can speak to the person's narrative.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the, I think the interesting kind of, paths forward for these things is presenting information that is, that resonates with someone's personal or cultural narrative, because that's how you get information into somebody.
Right.
And I think that could be weaponized.
Yeah. Well, okay. We just went down a path of a lot of ill this technology could be used for, right? Yeah. Do you think there's also ways that AI could strengthen public conversation and discourse and not just disrupt it and, not just be used as a weapon?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that I think there's sort of innumerable ways that it can help public discourse. It can help understanding. It's this kind of just as it's a very similar example, but it's the other side. And it's this fluency when you don't have English as a first language. And I had a student and English was not their first language. They seemed to be a very good computer scientist and mathematician. They were really strong in AI, but they just couldn't ever churn out papers.
Sure.
Which is, the currency of academia.
Yeah.
And then when LLMs came out, suddenly they were turning out these phenomenal papers. And it was because they were plagiarizing.
Yeah.
But what it was that they had phenomenal computer science ideas.
Yeah.
But those computer science ideas, they couldn't put down a paper fast enough to actually get published. And so right now in AI, for example, a lot of times you have 1 week to a few month turnaround from you have an idea, you run the experiment, you publish the paper. And if you're slower than that, someone else does it. Just because the field's moving at light speed. Mm-hmm. And so, what we found is that he's like, can I edit these papers can I do copy editing basically? And then he was turning out papers like mad on really cool, interesting things, and became one of my in terms of my students, the one that published the most by a long shot. It's very typical for a PhD to publish 2 or 3 papers in their entire PhD. Mm-hmm. He was publishing on average about 10 papers a year. Just because he had really cool ideas. And so that's letting him come into the public discourse, making a massive impact just by letting him talk.
Yeah.
Just by giving him that voice.
Right.
And I think there's just all sorts of things like that it can be used for good, like developing ideas, like doing copy editing, like thinking about how do you criticizing your own work, right? Mm-hmm. So that makes the science better.
Yeah.
It makes my writing better. It makes it more clear to the public. And even contributing scientific ideas, right? So I can feed some, I think scientists kind of speak a different language sometimes.
Yeah.
And, when I started grad school, whenever I would have a research problem that I was working on, my grandpa would always tell me okay, explain it to I'm 5. Why should we spend money on this research? How could you explain to a general person why this is valuable? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the interesting things, you could put it into some kind of large language model and say, what's the layman's version of this? How do I explain this to someone that's not in the field? Because I think that's one of the most valuable things we can do as scientists. Sure, we can pass around these physics papers that physicists understand. Mm-hmm. But if we really want to involve the public, we need to be able to say those things in a way that they understand and engages them.
Yeah.
And I think ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the LLMs, they can really facilitate this process of kind of boiling it down to this is the interesting part.
I got to say, you're making another really good case of why AI should replace me, because that's the whole reason I started this show, Joshua.
Perfect.
So thanks, I guess.
No problem. Just put that out there. Yeah.
So those are academic examples, right? Yeah. You're an academic, so obviously that's where your perspective's from. But do you think AI has potential to kind of augment public discussion in terms of media, in terms of how people talk to one another?
I definitely do. Mm-hmm. Whether it's you need to understand a particular topic and you just want the basics, right?
Sure.
For example, Perplexity AI is a really okay way. I'll say it that way. It's a really okay way of kind of getting the basics.
Okay.
It draws from kind of weird sources a lot of times, but if it's a basic thing, not some cutting edge thing, a lot of times it'll give you really interesting insights, right? And so you can really understand some kind of topic. Or if you need to like, can't really figure out how to word this, email to my girlfriend to break up with her, or your text or whatever, right? Maybe it can like brainstorm with you. That's going to help that public discourse process. But yeah, I think in a lot of ways too, like, understanding things across the aisle. And, something that I've done is say that like, okay, I have this viewpoint. Explain to me the other side. How would they think about it? Why is it right? What are they drawing on? Because I think that if you come to things with a level of uncertainty, right? And come to things curious. And why do you think about it this way? I mean, and you assume you're not right about everything. A lot of these LLMs can say, well, this is the other argument.
Sure.
And you can dig into that.
Okay.
Right? It gives you a starting point. And I think it gives these really interesting starting points to like engage with public discourse. And especially this uncertainty thing, right? I think that's one of the things that is really important for helping with, depolarization, or what you want to call that, is really having an uncertainty about the other side. Not just assuming they're wrong. Yeah. Not assuming you're right.
Right.
Let me just look at both the arguments. Does it even make sense? Maybe they have really good points.
Yeah.
And I know that whenever I've done that, I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't think about that part.
Yeah.
So
okay. So for me personally, the emergence of convincing generative AI has been pretty disorienting. And I'm talking largely about images and video, in the sense that I feel like I can't believe anything I see on the internet anymore. Even when it is real, sometimes I take a second look at something and I'm like, is this AI? Or if something is, whatever tweaks in my brain that I know something's AI, it just makes me question everything. Which I think is like kind of one reason that everyone's going crazy. So if you're scrolling social media, how do you have any like pointers for how someone might identify something that has been generated versus something that's real?
I mean, I think it's a really good point that it's getting to this point where, really worldwide, we're in this point of we don't trust anything. Nothing's true. Everything's wrong. Like, well, no matter how you look at it, all the facts are wrong. And now you throw generative AI on top of that, especially in the video and image space. I would say not so much on the LLM side. And now, nobody trusts what they're seeing, especially if it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And two, it's just a scapegoat, right? Like no matter, if something horrible happens and there's video evidence or there's photo evidence, that doesn't matter anymore, right? It used to be like, see it to believe it.
Yeah.
That sort of mentality that if there's like, well, if I have video proof or I have photo proof, that person's guilty. Now you have video proof or photo proof. Oh, that was AI generated. And you can imagine like some kind of, horrible recording from some politician that comes out that's, snuck out. Yeah, that was AI generated.
Yeah.
So you don't have accountability anymore, right? First of all, the public doesn't trust it. And then it's this lack of accountability that we now lost. Like we don't have photo or video evidence anymore, which is sort of mind-boggling.
It's unsettling to say the least.
Yeah. And like, I can't tell you the number of times people send me things like, is this AI generated? And I have no idea. And I mean, the kind of tells now are, look at the hands, look at the letters, look at the words, look at the numbers. And if any of those things are wrong, it's probably AI generated, like emphasis on probably. But it's really hard. I mean, the detection problem is extraordinarily hard for humans. It's also extraordinarily hard for AI.
So you've done some research that works on identifying AI, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So for the last 3 or 4 years, been working on a variety of different algorithms with some really phenomenal students on detection, attribution, and characterization of AI.
Okay.
And so to kind of break those down, detection is just, is this piece of media AI or not?
Okay.
Attribution is who created it. So that can either be the US, China, Russia, or it could be GPT versus Claude, right? So I give you a piece of text and it says, oh, Claude wrote that. That's attribution. Characterization, in my opinion, is a pipe dream. And so that's why was it generated.
Right.
And so that just seems impossible because a lot of times the why, like the causality of why the photo was made or why the image was made or whatever, just isn't there. And so I think a really simple example that I use quite a bit is that if you imagine a photo of a woman and a man standing on the side of a cliff or in some beautiful landscape.
Sure.
And then you use AI to suck the man out. So that was AI manipulation of an image, right? So, but now the characterization question is, why did she pull the man out? Is it just because she's really interested in having yourself with a beautiful landscape? Or was like that her ex and she doesn't want her husband to know?
Yeah.
One of those is very malicious intent. One of them is completely fine.
Yeah.
And neither of those is inside of the data.
Right.
Right. So if I have both images, it doesn't say like, oh yeah, she's cheating on her husband.
Yeah.
And so I think the characterization part is really hard. And so we focused a lot on detection. It turns out that detection and attribution are pretty similar. So it's a similar algorithms you can use. And in the detection space, what you're really trying to do is look at features of the text you're looking at that stand out as AI or stand out as human. And the way that generally works, anybody that's done this kind of work will tell you, is just basically you have a big set of here's text generated by AI, here's human text. You feed it in with those labels. And then you try to extract particular features that tell you this is sort of the style of Claude. This is the style of Hemingway.
Right.
And so that's basically what you do. And then you feed in other data and it tells you how accurate you are.
So the example you used of characterization being real hard to pin down, the woman on the cliff, that's borderline impossible, right?
I think so.
But when it comes to like state level actors, right? If you can attribute something to Russia or China, you can derive a little bit of the characterization from that, right? It's like, we don't know exactly what the aim is here, but maybe we could tell what the broader aim is in terms of like destabilizing a country or like disrupting public discourse, right?
Maybe.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the problem is that like humans are really good storytellers and you're really good pattern matchers, right? And so say that Russia say that China generated some kind of propaganda against Indonesia, right? And you see that propaganda in Indonesia. And then, you see that propaganda going around Indonesia. You attribute it to China. And now is where the storytelling plays, right? Like you can look at the text and see what it's about. But why did they do it? Like, is it because they wanted to strengthen their ties with Indonesia? Did they want to break their ties with Malaysia? Like there's all these attributes that you really just don't know, right? Is it just, I mean, it could be to promote some kind of candidate. It could be so discourse with America. And so it's hard. Like, I mean, and you're right. There are correlations. There are a way to say like, well, it's about the Belt and Road Initiative and, X, Y, and Z. So we know that it was propaganda in this way. And they generated it to to make Indonesia better friends with China or whatever it may be, right? But really definitively saying the causal relationship is extraordinarily hard.
I'd like to talk about policy a little bit. Okay. So I know in the past, you've talked to the New Mexico legislature about AI and policy in that sense. Some people think we need pretty strict rules for AI. Some people think it should be really open and accessible. I was kind of curious where you fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard because I don't know that regulation of AI makes a lot of sense. A lot of AI researchers don't understand AI. Politicians surely don't understand AI. And then they're supposed to regulate the cutting edge of technology, right?
It's a tall order for anybody, right?
100%.
You can't be a subject matter expert on every single thing, especially something as quickly evolving as AI, and then expect to like legislate on it.
Exactly. And so I think some kind of like basic regulation is really important in terms of one of the things I suggested to them was labeling. If it's AI, you have to label it. Just something as simple as that, right? You put out a campaign video that has your adversary doing something they didn't really do. You have to say it was generated by AI. And, I think things like that. But then beyond that, what does regulation look like, right? That, only, right-wing information can be fed into it. Or it has to be right-wing leaning. Or I could say if it's the other administration, right? That, only left leaning information can be fed into this.
Sure.
Or, I can imagine China, for example, kind of putting their finger on one of their LM companies and saying, only put in pro-China, anti-US information.
Sure.
So that when that thing gets passed over to someone in Singapore or Indonesia or wherever, whenever they ask it a question, all they're seeing is China side, not America side. So I think regulating it has these issues of kind of like Big Brother, what information can you see?
Yeah.
And from, I think at least from the data side, that's how I see it.
What about, media literacy and digital literacy, I don't think really, especially media literacy, is not prioritized in the United States. It's not something I don't think most schools teach at a young age. Like, I think I only really learned a lot about media literacy when I was in journalism school, and not everyone goes to journalism school. Why would you?
Right.
But do you think those things could help us navigate a noisy AI space, specifically digital and media literacy?
I think for sure we need to, I know this is a very hot topic and a very contentious topic. I personally think digital and media literacy are super important. I was really happy to see that some of the public schools in Phoenix are doing media literacy in their curriculum.
Yeah.
And the really cool part was that I do a lot of sort of public lectures, especially with little kids, on just how do you recognize what's good and bad information? How do you dissect it for yourself? Like, how do you fact check? Like, just kind of the basic things. And 2 years ago, I would have things like, I'd have students, in middle school or high school saying, wait, they can lie on the news? Because I thought all news had to be correct. And it was these things of like, they just didn't understand what is news, what's allowed on news, these kind of things. And then the last year, I gave this exact same lecture, and a lot of the students were just straight up bored, which was awesome because I don't think I've changed that much. And so I don't think it was me getting a lot more boring. But they're like, yeah, we learn all this in school now, which is awesome because then they're going to be better consumers of their information environment. Yeah. So
that's great. So that's a hopeful note. Let's stay on the hopeful note. Does anything give you hope that we can maybe build a healthier information environment, even as AI becomes more powerful and prevalent?
I think this is something that, I don't know, the more I am in this space, the more I don't think so.
Okay, no hope.
Yeah, no hope. I feel like, and
that was brief.
It just gets, yeah, exactly. I don't know. It gets kind of worse and worse. The more you're polarized, the more the content is controlled, the more power is kind of consolidated. I don't see the information environment getting better, especially as, the people that you should trust in the information environment, like kind of the pillars of democracy, you can't anymore. And so what does that mean for like the future of information, right?
Sure.
It means that it's going to come from kind of unnamed sources, popular podcasters, mom groups, like whatever it may be. That's going to be kind of the source of information. And there's going to be no trust in your education process or politicians or journalists or the scientific process. And that's what we're seeing right now, right? It's like, so then how do you go from that kind of backwards? And I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in this world that are so much smarter than me, and I hope they come up with an answer, right? I was recently working with a government, and they were talking about how do you come back from information warfare, right? So they had some, really bad information warfare campaigns between different groups in a particular country, and they said that like, okay, we're at a ceasefire because it actually turned into a full civil war based on the information warfare. Like it got all the way to the bad, like so bad that people started physically attacking each other in a full blown war for 2 or 3 years
because of false information online.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they ceasefired and they said, okay, how do you undo the last 4 years of information warfare? And it's just this, I don't know, is the only answer I have, right? And we have these narratives about the world, and once they're sort of ingrained, they're really, really hard to change. And the information that you consume kind of seeps into you through your narrative, right? Like, yep, that's true because it confirms all these different biases I have. And if you're sort of deep in that narrative and fully polarized, it's really hard to get information from kind of the other side and recognize that. And I think that's why I was saying that, using an LLM to say like, well, what's the other viewpoint, right? That kind of depolarizes you by seeing the other narrative.
So a few times you have mentioned that we should not treat AI as a prophet. You can't. Yeah. So, but I'm going to ask the impossible of you, okay. And I want you to be a prophet. Look forward 5 years. How do you imagine generative AI will have changed the way we get news and information in the future?
Well, at least you have an easy question for me.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's interesting to see like how are these models going to develop, and so they've kind of rocketed forward in the last couple of years, like unbelievably, from barely functional to, honestly, at a collegiate or better level for most topics. Maybe not the cutting edge things, but a lot of things. But then it's like you went from GPT-4, or 4.5, which was stunning, to 5. And there's not really that much of an improvement. And you hear, some of the CEOs of these tech companies say, we're almost out of data. And which is really an interesting statement, because they're saying we can't really make these large language models better because we've already read all of the text. Like,
there's no words left.
There's no words left. We can't continue to get better.
Yeah.
Right. And then one of the concerns there too is that, it's called like poisoning the model, where the model starts digesting its own text.
Yeah.
Which kind of has been shown to really degrade the overall model performance. And so if models keep getting better, I think the sky's the limit. I think people will think about it. I think it's in this kind of really interesting socio-technical thing, though, where people are now being replaced in large part by AI. The AI is hallucinating. It's just, I don't know where it'll go, because maybe some brand new model comes out like they do every Thursday. And maybe they'll kind of plateau, and then it's not. But I think that I think being a lot more ingrained in this information environment, not going to sources, but just going to the AI and trusting it. So I'm not sure. Okay. I think that my most honest answer is I don't know. And based on I'm not sure how much better the models will actually get.
Yeah.
At least without some really big innovation. And they happen all the time, right? If you look at DeepSeek, gives this fundamental innovation that made the training of these things so much faster and so much more energy and cost efficient.
Okay. Well, thank you for the look into your cloudy crystal ball.
No problem. Definitely cloudy.
Not always uplifting, but I think this has been very interesting. Okay. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning into Lab Code Optional. We are a production of the Strategic Marketing Communications team at Arizona State University's Knowledge Enterprise. Knowledge Enterprise is led by Executive Vice President Sally C. Morton. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. And if you found us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We are at the mercy of the mighty, fickle algorithms, and stuff like that helps people find the show. As always, lab coats are optional on this show, but we want to keep our researchers safe in the lab. So wear your PPE. Until next time, stay curious.